Good evening and welcome to Behind Headlines, and in this programme tonight we'll be discussing the British government's decision to allow 300 children from Gaza in their hospitals to come to the UK together with their families. On the face of it, sounds like a great humanitarian gesture on behalf of the British government, but is there a more darker, sinister agenda lurking behind the scenes? And we shall be unpacking that tonight. Tim, it's great you can join us again for Behind the Headlines. Really appreciate the efforts and your thoughts and your expertise into this topic. But share with us your initial thoughts of the announcement in the beginning of August to allow 300 children from Gaza who are being treated in the hospitals in Gaza to come to the UK to get treatment, and their families can come as well. And it also looks like the government is going to allow them to stay here under our asylum system as well.
Yeah, and of course this came off the fairly recent announcement as well of recognising a Palestinian state without the release of the hostages. It seems to me, that the government is again capitulating to those voices in their own government, in their own party, and also for votes. And on top of that, there's so much I know we're going to unpack, and there's so much to look into this, but it seems very sinister to me.
So let's go through what the government is planning. So we'll be discussing the controversial decision that the British government has announced to allow 300 children from Gaza to be treated in British NHS hospitals in the coming week. These 300 children shall also be accompanied by family members. After treatment, they are expected to stay in the UK courtesy of us, the British taxpayer. And on the surface, this sounds like a good humanitarian gesture on behalf of the British government, but will it be a sinister ploy to appease the Muslim vote for the Labour Party? We also need to raise serious questions about spare NHS paediatric capacity to bring the children from Gaza here, and will it have a serious impact on children wanting urgent medical operations in this country? We'll also raise the question, is the government prioritising the children of Gaza over those from Congo, or those from Sudan, or those from Afghanistan or Syria who are other injured or badly sick in other conflict zones around the world? And we'll also be asking how hospitals have been used in Gaza for the propaganda and terrorism purposes of Hamas. So lots to unpack. But let's start the programme reading from Matthew chapter 18, verse 6, that says the following: "But whoever causes one of these little ones of mine who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea."
Yeah, and the scripture, like so many in the Bible that you can see God's heart for the children. You can see that we're commanded to take care of the children, to protect the children, to let the little children come to Jesus, for example, using them as human shields, using them as propaganda tools with sinister, insidious motives. Well, I know that God sees this. It makes him very, very righteously angry, and I know it's disturbing.
Also, what's so disturbing as well is that prior to October the 7th, Hamas would carry out these paramilitary training camps for children, telling them how they could use guns and weapons in order to carry out jihad against Israel. So clearly this is a child abuse on a state level. Absolutely. And again, we're seeing that children are being used as political pawns for propaganda purposes on behalf of the Ministry of Health that's run by Hamas in Gaza.
Absolutely, and raising children to hate with this obsessive, demonic hate, that's, as you said, it's the worst kind of child abuse. What future are you providing for your children? You're teaching them so much wickedness, and it's pure evil.
I mean, we have seen that our mainstream media, particularly over this summer, has been absolutely infatuated with Gaza, the situation in Gaza, the humanitarian crisis, accusing Israel of deliberately starving the Gazans, preventing international aid from getting to them. And of course, when our mainstream media are being bombarded with these images from our mainstream media, of course, that then has an impact on our politicians, who are then putting on pressure on behalf of the government to then do something to being in this situation, so the government has now come up with a solution to this, to actually bring 300 children from Gaza hospitals to the UK and to be treated by the NHS, meaning that their family can also be can come with them, and then they can seek asylum afterwards. But the biggest disturbing aspect of all this is it's the Gazan Ministry of Health that's run by Hamas that will look and decide who comes. So it won't be looking on the medical grounds and the conditions of these children to come to the UK, but will be purely selected by Hamas, which is quite a frightening prospect. But also knowing, for example, the jihadi ideology, that the children and the families are indoctrinated within Gaza and Hamas coming to the UK. And of course, that's also going to have an impact in the months and years after these children have had their treatment. But we also don't know who's actually coming in and into the country either.
Absolutely, alarm bells should be ringing for many reasons, least of all what you mentioned. Nobody wants to see children suffer. You'd have to be heartless. Of course, none of us want to, but it's using this as propaganda constantly, and taking Hamas's word and as gospel, using what's going on in Gaza, which, can we just all remember, like, just keep our heads on us. This is Hamas's fault. Lay down your arms, give up, release the hostages, and it's over. You know, this was Hamas that attacked Israel, but everyone forgets this when we're bombarded with these images and these children are used for propaganda purposes.
Of course, the other aspect to this one is that our NHS is just getting back to its feet after the COVID-19 pandemic. There are thousands of children in our own country that need urgent medical care. Are these children from Gaza going to have priority over our own children? And so therefore we're going to have a two-tier health system under this scheme. And the other question is as well, why aren't, for example, the government looking to seeing children that are caught up in a war zone in Africa, whether it's in Congo, Sudan, or other places around the world? But no, they've decided to single out children from Gaza because domestically this goes down with a main domestic audience, which is the Muslim community and the Muslim vote. And of course, what we've seen, Tim, haven't we, since October the 7th is the massive demonstrations against Israel right throughout the UK, including London and our major cities like Manchester and Birmingham and Cardiff and Belfast, also Glasgow as well, in support of the Palestinian cause. And also knowing that the Labour Party fears that they're losing that Muslim vote. And of course, this is another means to try and shore up the Muslim vote, because they will need that vote going into the next general election to stay in power.
Absolutely, and disturbingly, a lot of these doctors for Palestine are included. Google AI overview states the following. The UK government is preparing to evacuate and treat up to 300 seriously ill or injured children from Gaza under the National Health Service, the NHS. Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced the acceleration of these efforts in June, with a plan set to be implemented in the coming weeks. The initiative follows significant political and public pressure to assist children affected by the ongoing conflict, and it will run alongside a privately financed scheme already bringing children for treatment. The key details of the plan include the number of children, up to 300 seriously ill or injured from Gaza, treatment that children will receive, the NHS treatment in the UK, accompanying family, each child will be accompanied by a parent or a guardian and potentially siblings. Security checks, the Home Office will conduct biometric and security checks on the children and their carers before they travel. The timeline, efforts are being made to expedite the evacuation, with the government aiming to bring them over as quickly as possible, possibly within weeks. And support, the scheme has received support from over 100 MPs. I
mean, on the surface level, this sounds like the government is showing kind of reaching out to the children in Gaza to show humanitarian care and consideration. But also poses the question is, we know that there is a backlog of operations, particularly for children in the NHS. So why can't they be treated in Jordan or in Egypt? Why do they need to actually come to the UK and be treated by us, the taxpayer, when we know, for example, that there are many children who urgently need urgent medical care, and it looks like they will now be prioritised over the children coming from Gaza. And of course, we don't know the conditions of some of the children coming over. We don't know the health conditions or anything else, because the British government will be negotiating and dealing effectively with Hamas, because Hamas run the Gaza Ministry of Health.
That's it. And, you know, I know myself, you know, my father's been waiting months for an operation. And, you know, part of what makes us British, it's that Christian value of wanting to help. And but there are, I mean, we're going to look at this and mention, but there are so many other needs, so many other countries. What is this? Why this spotlight? And there's so many questions, so many things that point to something sinister.
So the BBC News Online reported on the 18th of August 2025 under the following headline: first group of Gaza children to be brought to the UK in coming weeks. It says a group of between 30 and 50 critically ill and injured Palestinian children will be evacuated from Gaza to the UK for urgent medical treatment in the coming weeks, the BBC understands. They go on to say that the first children brought to the UK for treatment as part of a government operation being coordinated by the Foreign Office, Home Office and the Department of Health. The children will be selected according to need by doctors working for the Hamas-run Health Ministry before the World Health Organization coordinates travel. It comes after some MPs wrote a letter to the government urging them to bring sick and injured children from Gaza to the UK without delay. So we see that as of this article, a cross-party group of some 96 members of Parliament warned that children were at risk of imminent death due to the decimation of the healthcare system in Gaza, and any barriers to evacuate them should be immediately lifted. And they say that some Gazan children have already been brought to the UK privately for medical treatment through an initiative by an organisation called Project Pure Hope, but the government has so far not evacuated any of its own during this scheme, during this conflict. So effectively here we see the government is under pressure from 96 plus members of Parliament who are putting pressure for the government to do something in order to bring 300. Why 300? I don't know, but why do they also then have to be accompanied by their family members who will come to the UK as well and then resettle in this country? There's so many questions need to be asked around this, and particularly in light of everything else that British foreign policy seems to be set up in order to advance the Palestinian cause, no matter what the cost. That's what my initial thoughts were. I'm actually horrified by some of the things the government's been doing, but then I realised so many independent MPs were winning on the Gaza ticket, on the Palestinian ticket, and I think they've lost so many votes. So it becomes questionable, and these are our government, our representative. This is a decision that will have impact in our future. If these guys and their families stay, we will see that. The Ministry of Health Referral Committee in Gaza will review each case, decide the priority and approve the case for medical evacuation. And this is the point when the WHO steps in to coordinate documents with potential host countries, get security clearance from the Israeli authorities and organise travel. Sick children will travel from hospital with family members, usually one adult and up to 3 children, via a third country where biometric data will be collected. It's unclear which third country the children will transit through on their way to the UK, exactly how many children will be involved or whether further groups will follow. The host country agrees to cover the cost of treatment, including mental health support, as well as housing and living needs for the patient and their companions. And given the challenge of returning children to Gaza, it's understood that some will enter the asylum system on completing treatment, as returning patients must be able to access the care they need. Yeah, I mean, to look at the cost of this. So it's not the cost only of treating 300 children, but it's also providing housing and benefits and care to their family members who'll be staying with them. And no doubt, as soon as that the mother or their brothers and sisters are with them, then they'll be asking for the rest of their families to come over from Gaza and stuff as well. And again, the government is in crisis anyway with its mass asylum failure to clamp down on asylum seekers, which we've seen has sparked riots and demonstrations outside hotels hosting asylum seekers. And we've seen a whole disruption of violence because of that. So it's doing nothing in terms of social cohesion. For example, in Israel, for example, if we look at the situation where Israel over a decade ago helped children, for example, from Syria who were caught up in the Syrian civil war, they set up tents in the Golan Heights, right, helped the Syrian civilians who were injured or hurt, who needed urgent medical treatment, treated them then, and then they would then go back to their families in Syria. So why can't, for example, in Egypt, which has the Sinai, why can't they set up medical facilities and tents there and treat them there, and then when they're fit enough, they can go back? Why do they need to be treated in our hospitals, and why do they then we need to pay out huge amounts of cost in terms of benefits, housing costs and everything else, and provide a living for these people coming over? And of course then they'll want to bring other family members as well.
I mean, these are the questions that I'm so surprised more media outlets don't ask, and compare as well, contrast how Israel helped the Syrian children with the refugees that went to Europe, and look at some of the statistics there with some of the refugees that came to Germany or the Netherlands, and look at the percentage of those refugees that ended up committing crimes. It's a frightening prospect, and the right questions are not being asked, from mainstream media.
And Sky News reported on Monday, the 4th of August 2025, under the following headline: more children from Gaza to be brought to the UK for urgent medical treatment. And Keir Starmer was quoted, and this is what Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, said. He said, urgently accelerating efforts to bring children over for treatment. The government has also pledged another 1 million for the World Health Organization in Egypt to provide medical support to the evacuated Gazans. He told the Daily Mirror, I know the British people are sickened by what is happening. The images of starvation and desperation in Gaza are utterly horrifying. We are urgently accelerating efforts to evacuate children from Gaza who need critical medical assistance, bringing more Palestinian children to the UK for specialist medical treatment. So again, we've seen that our Prime Minister is making very clear his views and his opinion on bringing over 300 children from the hospitals in Gaza to NHS-run hospitals here in the UK funded by the taxpayer. But again, he keeps repeating this narrative that the citizens of Gaza are starving, the children are starving, and over recent last couple of months, it's been proved that these have been false. And yes, there are food shortages, but this is primarily to do with the UN. And this is to do with Hamas for political agenda to kind of weaponize international aid in order to stir up public opinion around the world against Israel and against Israel's military objectives, and that is to destroy Hamas in Gaza.
And we did a show recently on Behind the Headlines where we talked about the amount of aid trucks that were just sitting there and with the UN refusing to deliver them. This is a useful propaganda tool, starvation. We've seen pictures of children or men and women supposedly starving when it turns out they've got another degenerative disease. This is a constant thing. We've seen it's getting worse since October the 7th. It used to be bad. I used to think 2014 and 2021. But we're hitting whole new levels, and we are parroting Hamas propaganda, and so evidently is our government and members of our government.
And of course, we're seeing millions of tons of aid just decaying because the UN won't deliver it. And because they're more interested in the propaganda value of this than actually providing that aid anyway. So we also see that over 100 MPs have signed a letter urging the government to fast track this scheme. And what's interesting as well, that we got Labour MP Stella Casey, for example, who has coordinated the letter, and she wrote the following. She says, the commitment we all share to help these children remains absolute and urgent with every day. More are harmed or die, making the need to overcome any barriers to increasing the support we give them imperative. We stand ready to support whatever it takes to make this happen, and ask for your urgent response. This is the same Labour MP who was actually behind the proposed legislation to decriminalise abortion even at birth, and she's the main signature of this letter, 100 MPs signing this letter, asking the British government to actually treat Palestinian children in Gaza in our NHS hospitals.
And it tells you their bent, if you like, this agenda for abortion, for example. You would put this I would say almost like a far left Marxist agenda. You see that Red Green Alliance again. What's pushing? What's the driving force for a lot of these policies? What's the driving force for a lot of the media? There's this left agenda, but it's mixed with this agenda and using Gaza, using the children, and using that propaganda to push a political agenda in our country.
Absolutely. So we also see that there's a project called Project Pure Hope that is actually behind this initiative to help bring children from Gazan hospitals to be treated by the NHS. So you can go to their website, it's called purehope.co.uk, and they quote, "If anyone saved a life, it would be as if they saved the life of all mankind." A similar quote made by a kind of famous Jewish rabbi, and that's in reference to the kind of Holocaust as well. But according to their own words, Project Pure Hope is an initiative led by a coalition of UK healthcare leaders and humanitarians. They said that we are committed to working towards providing life-saving medical care and support to children who are victims of the Middle East conflict, regardless of their nationality, religion or ethnicity. Nothing about Israelis that were killed and murdered or injured on October the 7th. Nothing about the Israeli hostages who are still being held by Hamas in appalling conditions, are not given the urgent healthcare, medical care that they need. They go on to say that the ongoing conflict in the Middle East has led to thousands of deaths and injuries of children. Healthcare systems in the region who have led the support of injured Gazan civilians are strained, providing a clearly defined access to short-term specialist care in the UK, e.g. for the complex trauma, cancer treatment and psychological therapy to a small group of children will significantly improve outcomes and relieve tension or strained systems. They said that since October 2023, Gaza's healthcare system has been devastated, hospitals have been destroyed, medical personnel killed or detained, and children, mainly gravely injured, are left with no access to the urgent care that they desperately need. And the UK is home to some of the best paediatric facilities in the world, yet while countries like the US, Belgium, Italy, Switzerland and many others have stepped in to help, the UK has not done the same.
They also say that we've been working hard to change that since November 2023. We have a simple, urgent mission to bring injured Gazan children to the UK for life-saving treatment at no cost to the NHS, the government or the taxpayer. Project Pure Hope does not have a single CEO, rather it is a humanitarian initiative founded by a group of doctors and health executives, including co-founders Dr. Omar Abdelmanan, Raza Halim, Dr. Fazana Rahman, Omar Din and Dr. Junaid Bajwa. Dr. Abdelmanan is described as the president and the founder. And before we look at Dr. Obed, when I looked around the website, this quote, which sounds like a Talmud, a rabbi quotes, it really, my reaction is when I see this, it really bothers me when they use Holocaust language to do with Gaza, or when they use anything that's happened to the Jewish people and turn it around as if the Jewish people are doing that to the Gazans. I find that so insidious. And using a Jewish quote, it's not just manipulative. There's something inside that. I find that really, really anti-Semitic.
No, and also what's disturbing as well, it's presented as a nice project, nice humanitarian project, the Project Pure Hope, and kind of saying we're helping all children of the Middle East, and then you read down a couple of paragraphs and then it's all about Gaza. And we see that the founder, his name is Dr. Omar Abdelmanan, and he is a British Egyptian, a paediatric neurologist based in London since 2011. He has participated participated in a number of medical and teaching delegations to Gaza and the West Bank. He is the founder and president of the Health Workers for Palestine, a global grassroots movement of health professionals and allies advocating for the right to health and the end of the illegal occupation of Palestine. So on the one hand, we're seeing here that a humanitarian gesture is hiding a more sinister political undertones to effectively radicalise and influence the UK government and health officials to actually realise his real agenda is the kind of Islamisation of and fill in with that agenda of Hamas and the Palestinian Authority.
And that agenda, obviously, it's uncovered as we're talking about on their website, wanting to help all ethnicities, nationalities and religion. Well, there is no Israelis, no hostages mentioned, and no one else coming apart from the Gazans.
Absolutely, and if you go onto the Health Workers for Palestine website, it was set up in October 2023 when Hamas carried out their devastating terrorist attack on Israel. And from there, we also see that one of their CEOs is a picture of her, who's a doctor and CEO, and she's at one of these big rallies in support of the Palestinian cause. And of course, we know these rallies, you've seen these rallies, they call for the destruction of the modern state of Israel, and there's incitement against Israel and against the Jewish people. And of course, this is where we hear the chant, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is an incitement to genocide. Yeah. So we see that they are actively taking part to advance the cause of creating a Palestinian state, which will be in line with Hamas's aims and objectives, Islamist state that wants to destroy the modern state of Israel. So there is no wanting peace and security with Israel. No, this is advancing the Palestinian cause, which is one of the elimination of Israel rather than a state of their own and independence for their own people. It's interesting to know that on Sunday, the 20th of August, the Mail on Sunday published an excellent article written by Dan Hodges under the following title: "This is an appalling reason Labour are evacuating 300 children from Gaza to be treated by the NHS, not to fall for their cynical games." So he writes, he says, "In a few weeks' time, a group of 6 children will be evacuated from Gaza and brought to the UK for treatment on the NHS. The move repeatedly organised by jointly the Health Secretary Wes Streeting and Home Secretary Yvette Cooper will see up to 300 young patients evacuated along with parents or guardians and siblings. And according to the government sources, many of them will probably never return home and will be granted asylum in the UK." He goes on to write that the move was immediately condemned by independent MP Robert Lowe, who tweeted the following: "We should put British children first. I will say it again. Speak to the British parents of sick children who are forced to wait months and months for an appointment, never mind a sodding scam or even actual treatment."
Yeah, MP Rupert Lowe there saying what's actually on a lot of our minds. The first, he goes on to write, the first and one that will find greatest resonance among the British public relates to the needs of our own children, as Rupert Lowe said. Do we currently have sufficient spare NHS paediatric capacity to enable us to bring children from overseas without having an impact on the treatment of domestic patients? On one level, it's a difficult question to answer unless you know the precise nature of care being provided. When he unveiled the scheme, the Prime Minister first said it would be for critical medical assistance, but then claimed it would be for specialist medical treatment. The scheme is reportedly going to be run in parallel with an existing privately financed scheme called Project Pure Hope. In May, that initiative brought 2 children over from Gaza, one of whom reportedly required treatment for fluid pressing on the optic nerve of a left eye and another with a bowel condition. It may well be the case that there's currently no NHS capacity problems relating to these sort of medical issues, but if that's the case, it's a remarkable stroke of good fortune. According to the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, more than 340,000 children and young people are currently awaiting treatment, 113,000 of whom have been waiting between 18 and 52 weeks. Finally, Dan Hodges writes, in 2024, Sir Keir Starmer claimed the paediatric waiting list for children was dangerous and damaging.
So depending on your agenda and how you feel at the time, you can say this before a general election, but once you've won office and you're in power, then you can do something else. And we see that as well. But also, I mean, the fact is that there has been a backlog primarily because of the impact of COVID-19 has had on our medical professions, the NHS as well. I mean, it's funded by the British taxpayers. It's funded by you and I and our viewers as well. So shouldn't we have any say over who gets treated? Anyway, Dan Hodges raises a very important point here. He goes on to write, but it says, even if you adopt the charitable assumption that 300 Gazan children can now be absorbed into the NHS without any impact on the current waiting lists, other questions still remain. And this is what he says. He says, precisely, who is deciding which children should gain access to British healthcare and how? He says it will be reasonable to expect that if children are being brought to the UK, they would be subject to some sort of triage system by British officials. But according to the BBC, the children will be selected according to need by doctors working for the Hamas-run health ministry. And of course, we know they're very truthful and honest, don't we? It says a matter of documented fact that doctors associated with Hamas, such as physician Ahmed Ahmadjal, have been directly responsible for the kidnapping and imprisonment of Israeli hostages. And Hamas is currently engaged in a massive publicity effort to generate sympathy for their cause and create pressure for a recognition of a Palestinian state. So it's unclear how anyone can be certain the children will be chosen on grounds of clinical need rather than propaganda or other purposes. He goes on to write, in addition, ministers have spent the past weeks claiming that they cannot make Palestinian recognition conditional on the hostage release because they won't negotiate with Hamas. But Dan writes something very important. He says, but they are clearly engaging in some form of negotiation with them, even via third parties over NHS treatment plans. So effectively, he's called out the government's policy to recognise a unilateral Palestinian state in the UN next month in September, saying, but we can't make the issue of the hostages as a proviso for this announcement because we don't have direct contacts with Hamas because Hamas are a terrorist organisation, yet we have some form of connection and negotiations because otherwise how would these children from Gazan hospitals come here to the UK?
Absolutely, this is highlighting, uncovering this double standard, if you like. This a lot of people have spoken about a two-tier system in other ways. Not, you know, and now we're seeing it in the NHS, if you like, or if in our charitable care. We've mentioned the amount of children that are suffering in other countries and other war zones, far more in number than we could ever know, and so many people don't know. And here we are saying we can't communicate with Hamas, so we can't help the hostages, or we can't make it proviso. At the same time, we need to be able to communicate with Hamas to bring over the Gazan children. It's double standard. Okay,
and the other question is, I mean, we care so much for the hostages. I wouldn't be wearing a hostage pin if I didn't. Is the fact, why can't they make this a condition? Why can't they say, can you urgently send in the Red Cross to look at the treatment of the Israeli hostages to make sure that they are getting proper medical attention, and in return for that we will grant access to 300 children from Gaza to be treated in our hospitals? I mean, that would then create a bit more of a level playing field. But then the government has said we can't because we're not in direct negotiations with Hamas, but we are via third party, or even have some back channels maybe to Hamas in Gaza. I don't know, because that hasn't come to light. But it's imperative, isn't it, that the Israeli hostages also get that treatment that they so desperately need. And we'll be unpacking a bit more of this later on in the programme. But it seems like double standards, and also we're creating a two-tier health system as well.
Absolutely, it'll be quite a simple thing to do, to say, you know, we demand access to the hostages to take care of these children. Look, none of us want to see these children in Gaza suffer. We all have our different opinions of what the cause is. You know, 100% is Hamas, but not adding that simple proviso on the basis that we have access to the hostages, who we will see are suffering more and more with every passing day.
Absolutely. So according to Dan Hodges again, he says that Save the Children said that the 10 most dangerous countries for children living in conflict zones are Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Mali, Nigeria, Cameroon, Sudan and Central African Republic. He said according to the DRC, some 14.2 million children are in need of humanitarian assistance. In Somalia, 1.5 million children are facing deadly malnutrition. In Mali, 1 child in 10 dies before their 5th birthday. So why are these children not being provided with the same opportunity to access life-saving and life-enhancing care in the UK?
Additionally, the defenders of the Gaza scheme point to a similar initiative aimed at providing healthcare to Ukrainian children. But we in the UK have a direct obligation to Ukraine because successive prime ministers have stated that the Ukrainians are fighting actually on the front line to protect us from Russian aggression, and we've actively encouraged them to continue to fight. Britain is not responsible for the current situation in Gaza. That rests squarely on the shoulders of Hamas, which sparked the Israeli invasion by launching the October 7th attacks. Yet these are the very people we are told are now facilitating the new evacuation plan.
And he also goes on to write about the reason why Labour is doing this, our Labour government. He says the reality is the children of Gaza are being prioritised over the children of Somalia, Sudan and the world's other brutalising war zones because of political need, not clinical need. He goes on to write that last month, Jeremy Corbyn announced the formation of a new party with opposition to the government's policy on Gaza at the heart of his recruitment drive and political agenda. A major backlash is underway towards the government's prescribing of Palestinian Action as a terror organisation. He says that Labour MPs who are already under intense pressure from pro-Palestinian and Muslim voters in their own constituencies have reached breaking point following the decision of the Israeli government to accelerate military operations to destroy Hamas and free the hostages. He goes on to say that was led to the recent panicked announcement by Starmer that Britain would recognise a Palestinian state regardless of whether or not the hostages would be freed, an announcement that was in itself forced upon him following the ambush by members of his own cabinet, including Wes Streeting and Yvette Cooper, the same 2 ministers driving the current evacuation and treatment plan.
He also says that, there are people that advocate that Britain should turn its back or at least shun the world's problems while our own system is teetering on the edge of collapse, where the health system is still struggling to recover from COVID-19 and decades of neglect. Even if we choose to open our borders, Dan writes, and other sustenance and support to the world's most vulnerable, that should be an exercise in compassion, not electoral cynicism. And the truth is the Gaza scheme is not being driven by the plight of the children, but the plight of Labour politicians. If Labour's conference hall had been filled in 2018 by Yemeni flags or Sudanese flags, children from those countries would currently be packing for the flight to Heathrow.
Absolutely. I think he makes a kind of very valid point because we see that really that Labour, despite having its massive historical kind of majority in the House of Commons, is under threat because they, the Muslims, particularly the Muslim voters, actually don't feel that the government is doing enough to advocate and support the Palestinian cause, particularly of Gaza. And so therefore this has become a toxic issue. This has become such an issue now that Labour MPs with big Muslim constituencies are being very, very concerned that this would have electoral catastrophe come the next general election and they could lose their seats. And so instead of taking on what is probably looking at this objectively and looking at British foreign policy objectively and say, look, what is the true agenda going on behind this announcement to bring 300 children and their families from Gaza to the UK for NHS help and medical care, knowing that this actually helps to serve this agenda, which is to promote the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian narrative of a Palestinian state with its aims to destroy the nation of Israel. Essentially, this is what this is all about. So let's have a look now. Really, if you want to compare our hospitals in the NHS in Britain to that of those in Gaza and Hamas, let's look at this very important news report that's been put together by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, of where they used an original report from France 24.
Did, however, speak to a doctor who I've spoken to before, and he was here 2 years ago. He's a British specialist. He doesn't want to say his name because he doesn't want to endanger any of the colleagues that he was with. He was 3 months in Gaza and the West Bank, and he was quite a lot of time at Shifa and another hospital in Gaza. And he contacted me again within the last few days, just to see how I was. And then he reminded me of his experiences in Shifa. And I decided that I would record some of what he said, because it is interesting to hear a perspective of an outsider and one who is safe enough to speak.
The main point was, when I was first asked to work there, I was told there was a part of the hospital I was not to go near. And if I did, I'd be in danger of being shot.
Shot? You mean actually shot with a gun?
Yes.
Was it explained to you why that was?
No, but implicit was that it was being used for non-medical purposes.
And did you see anything non-medical, or did you obey the instruction and stay away?
I stayed away, but I saw a few sort of dodgy-looking non-medical characters going in and out all the time. It was a ward leading to a basement. As I say, I didn't go there, so I behaved myself.
They would say there could be many other reasons that you would be told not to go to a particular area of a hospital. It's not unusual.
Well, I was welcome everywhere else. And as I say, the doctors and nurses there were very welcoming and very kind. And the hushed tones under which this was said was consistent with all the other hushed tones about which Hamas was discussed. You know, people were genuinely fearful. I cannot emphasise too much the air of collective paranoia that existed there.
So that was his perspective. He did go on to recount certain threats that were made against some doctors there. And he did also say that if they were frightened, this was, of course, before this current war, when the proportions would be different. But he did go on to say that if they were 10% frightened of a possible Israeli airstrike, they were 90% frightened of getting onto the wrong side of Hamas. He really did describe an atmosphere of fear.
So let's see another report from our friends at CBN, and this time showing how Hamas is actually using hospitals for their headquarters, but also a means to carry out attacks against Israel. Bear in mind that this report is over a year old, but it's extremely relevant to see how Hamas actually use hospitals, which is not being reported by our mainstream media.
Dr. Nasser Bulbul, head of the NICU at Al-Shifa, Gaza's largest hospital, says they are on the verge of running out of critical supplies to keep some of their most vulnerable patients alive.
We do not know what to do, as we are facing a severe shortage of medical supplies, ventilators, and essential life-saving medicines.
While Gazans continue to face severe shortages deep beneath Al-Shifa hospital, Israel says Hamas has stored up ample food, water, fuel, and other critical supplies, including weapons, to carry out its war against the Jewish state.
Hamas terrorists operate inside and under Shifa hospital and other hospitals in Gaza with network of terror tunnels.
The IDF releasing this animated video claiming that the terror group operates its command and control headquarters from several underground complexes beneath Al-Shifa.
Hamas also has an entrance to those terror tunnels from inside the hospital wards, meaning from different places of the hospital, you can go into an underground tunnel that will provide you shelter.
The Islamist militant group which controls the Gaza Strip has been using human shields in conflicts with Israel since 2007.
I know what it feels like to be used as a human shield. Back in 2014, during Israel's war with Hamas, I was in Gaza City, and almost every night I could see Hamas fighters assemble, then fire off their rockets from the basement of my hotel. Hamas knew without a shadow of a doubt that the Israelis would not target the hotel because it was filled with foreign journalists.
A captured Hamas fighter who infiltrated Israel on October 7th, telling interrogators that the terror group uses hospitals like Al-Shifa to hide their fighters and weapons because such places are often teeming with civilians.
I told you, Shifa is a safe place. It will not be struck. To them, it is safe. And that is what we know.
And it's just not hospitals. Hamas often uses structures closest to schools, mosques, and even churches, from which they can hide weapons, fighters, and launch rockets. On October 20th, a prominent Greek Orthodox church in Gaza City sustained heavy damage when Israel hit the headquarters of a Hamas commander. The IDF releasing this video of the strike to CBN News, telling us that the terrorist's home was 50 meters from the church. The ensuing explosion destroying a part of the church and reportedly killing 18 Palestinian Christians.
Hamas not only endangers the lives of Israelis, civilians, but also exploit innocent Gazan civilians as human shield. The IDF will continue making efforts to minimize harm to civilians' population and will continue to act in accordance with international law.
George Thomas, CBN News, along the Israel-Gaza border.
And thanks to our friends at CBN for that important report on how Gaza, how Hamas, should I say, is cynically, not just cynically, I would say insidiously using hospitals and as human shields, if you like, and as for propaganda purposes, and using their own people as cover for their terrorist activities, something that Israel has shown and proved and claimed time and time again, while the world ignores. And let's as well see how Israeli hostages were treated in these Gaza hospitals. According to the Daily Mail on the 7th of August 2024, under the following headline, "Doctors reveal health issues suffered by Israeli hostages taken by Hamas." They write that the doctors who were treated freed Israeli hostages who were captured by the group Hamas in October have revealed the state of their health when they returned. 26 hostages were released to an Israeli hospital where many of them were found to be malnourished, surviving on a diet made primarily of white bread, as a new study states. In this following video clip, the IFM shows that the real famine in Gaza is actually happening to the hostages, as indeed we've seen in recent video clips of some of the hostages looking like actually Holocaust survivors. So this is a clip from the IFM.
So we see there very distressing images. The only people that are really starving in Gaza are the Israeli hostages, still being held against their will by Hamas, still being denied access to the Red Cross, and yet our government is silent when it comes to the plight of the hostages. And surely if we are going to accept 300 children from Gaza to be treated by the NHS, then also we need to see that the government is doing something to actually do for the hostages, to bring them home, or to at least provide them with decent medical health care with the horrible conditions that they're in. And of course that is just echoes that of the Holocaust. This article goes on to talk about, which is really interesting, is that many of the hostages have had blood tests, also showed that they've been exposed to a range of different diseases, including typhus and spotted fever during their 50 days of captivity. These are the hostages that were released in November and early December 2023. Says many of them also experiencing head lice due to poor hygiene conditions, including a lack of running water. Others had shrapnel wounds that had gone untreated for so long the pieces could not be surgically removed. Doctors also noticed severe psychological trauma, particularly in the young children who had been ripped from their homes or forced to watch loved ones being murdered. The physicians at the Schneider Children's Medical Center in Israel called it an atrocious situation. acknowledging the true traumatic toll of the war and the captivity will continue to reveal itself in years to come. We see that doctors and others, and emergency medical doctors, began treating 26 women and children after they were released by the temporary ceasefire back in November and December 2023. So the Daily Mail reports that their vital signs upon arrival at the hospital were normal, but further examinations revealed an array of issues reflective of the conditions in which they were forced to live. The doctors said the high rate of diarrhea episodes in our cohort can be explained by the poor sanitation, the crowdedness and lack of running water in captivity. They said the observation that some of their patients had positive PCR, stool tests for several pathogens support poor hygiene status, as well as moreover for extremely severe infestation of head lice in our coherent cohort, and highlights poor hygiene conditions in which the hostages were held. I mean, some of the treatments are and the experiences of the hostages and what they faced is horrible. Do you want to read out a few more, particularly talking about the 15 to the 26 hostages that were released?
Yeah, well, 6 of the 26 were taken to hospital with head lice. 8 people, 3 women and 5 children, had shrapnel wounds to their limbs, chest and pelvis, and experts treating their injuries decided that because it had been so long since they'd sustained them, surgery to remove the shrapnel was now too difficult because it healed over it. By 50 days of being held captive, the bodies begun to heal around the debris. Furthermore, 15 showed significant weight loss, limited food while they were in captivity. Diet was rice and white bread with no vegetables, protein and fat. And in those 50 days, the 7 adult women in the group, who ranged from ages 34 to 78, lost between 7.5% and 40% of their body weight. 19 children from 2 to 18 were taken. 8 of them had lost between 5 and 11% of their body weight. 6 patients, including 5 children, were covered with insect bites, and 1 child had a skin infection. Others had their asthma symptoms worsened. 3 people suffered widespread muscular pain, with tests showing elevated levels of an enzyme that indicated damage to the muscles. Another patient suffered a gunshot wound to the lower abdomen. The infection that resulted was treated in captivity with only topical medication, and in most cases the extent of the hostages' psychological trauma could not be seen, though certain behaviours linked to their traumatic experience played out, such as children demonstrating overly submissive behaviours such as talking quietly, hunching, which is of course heartbreaking.
No, absolutely. So, of course, we see our own government is ignoring this. But it's also important that in comparison to the way that Hamas have treated the Israeli hostages, who they took against their will, which is a war crime in itself, that the Israeli hospitals even treated Hamas members of October the 7th, those who committed the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, have been treated in Israeli hospitals. So therefore, they are given the same treatment as a Jewish patient, as well as being a Hamas terrorist. But we see there there's total different standards of treatment when it comes to the Israeli hostages. None of them were provided with that urgent medical care that they needed. Many situations are when many of the hostages were wounded or injured, were only just kind of sewn up without any anesthetics at all, so they felt the pain and everything else they had to endure while going under an operation. So I think it just shows you the true face of Hamas in how they've been treating the hostages, and yet Israel goes out of their way even to treat members of Hamas who committed the worst atrocities in Israel's modern history.
And let's not forget, they treated even Sinwar way back when. You can't contrast. It's like light and dark, good and bad, good and evil. The way they were treated was appalling. It breaks every kind of convention as a war crime.
And also, I mean, when we look at the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing in Gaza, the health crisis, all of this was caused by Hamas. It's easy to put the kind of blame on Israel, because that's what our mainstream media want to do, that's what our government wants to do. But the reality is that Hamas is not taking any responsibility for the carnage that it caused on October the 7th. They are the ones who invaded Israel. Israel had every right under international law to go in and actually destroy Hamas, who poses that existential threat, who carried out the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history. And yet we know that Hamas used children for propaganda purposes. So how do we know that the children coming from Gaza are genuine in their kind of medical needs and conditions that they should be treated by the NHS?
Absolutely, this is the important question. Listen, Hamas launched a pogrom and calculated, knowing that the world's media and the politicians would turn against Israel. That's not a genius move. That's because they know what the world is like. It's not because we're inherently good and we're compassionate. It's actually about self-righteousness, virtue signalling, pride, and also that ancient spirit of anti-Semitism.
Tim, great to be doing Behind Headlines with you, and thank you for watching Behind Headlines tonight. We really do need to let our members of Parliament know that bringing over 300 children from Gaza to be treated by the NHS is probably not necessarily a good idea. So I want to thank you for watching Behind Headlines.